This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. There are some projects that from the moment they enter the studio are all I can think about. During the day, at home, at night, I am anticipating the labor that will go into them, the transformation that will be on the other side, and yes, my client's reaction, even if they are far afield and in another country. For every easy painting that is, well, easy and fun, there is a painting that is challenging because it requires intellectual, emotional, and physical investment. But these promise to pay dividends on the other end. And this painting of Dionysus or Bacchus does not disappoint. Though without a title, absent a signature or authorship, and devoid of provenance, it is clear that this painting was executed by somebody with great talent. The composition draws your eye in. The rendering of the figures is compelling, and the beautiful way that the skin tones were handled as they come out of the darkness, well, it's just stunning. But problematic for this painting is, well, just about everything else. The surface is so textured and so cracked and falling apart that it's impossible to see anything I mentioned previously. The paint is cracking, areas are flaking off, they catch your eye, and they make it impossible to see anything but the surface. Areas that have been completely reconstructed because of loss are pretty visible. There are areas that are smooth that are not supposed to be, textured where they're supposed to be smooth. And the light catches all of this and betrays any quality work that was done during the past conservation. This piece is glue-lined to an old canvas, adhered to a mediocre stretcher support. There is a heavy layer of grime and significantly discolored natural varnish, and the old retouching has started to darken or change and betrays its likely once accurate nature. And so, the conservation of this piece will require just about everything we do in the studio, including a heavy dose of patience, discipline, and fortitude, because I suspect it will be a grand project. But these grand projects are exciting, and for me as a conservator, well, yes, I like the easy ones, but the difficult ones, well, they're a challenge that I relish. They allow me to test my skills, to push myself further, and to see just what I'm capable of. And so in that sense, with this painting, my cup runneth over. You know, the first time I tackled a really major project like this one on my own, well, I was completely overwhelmed. I mean, now it's easy for me to joke about my cup runnething over with the amount of work that needs to be done, but back then, some 25 years ago, gee, I was completely in over my head. And that paralysis can stop you in your tracks, delay your dreams, cripple your business. So when it comes time for you to build that website that you've been procrastinating, turn to Squarespace. They've got it all figured out, and it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. 1. Find your domain name. If you don't have one already, you can look one up and purchase it right through Squarespace's website. If you already have a domain, you can transfer it over to Squarespace, where they offer competitive pricing and seamless integration with their web platform. 2. Choose your template. You can select from one of Squarespace's thousands of professionally designed templates that work anywhere from desktops to tablets, even mobile devices, so your visitors get a unified, complete experience no matter where they are. No coding required. 3. And this is the fun one, filling it up with whatever you like. Now, you are probably going to run into some questions along the way. This is a big project after all, and this is where Squarespace shines. They have webinars, online articles, how-to guides, and videos walking you through how to do just about everything on their sites. And if you still need a little bit more help, well, there's a robust forum of people just like you using Squarespace that are happy to jump in and give you a hand. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Baumgartner to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. To say that I am excited, hungry, or even thirsty to get started on this project is an understatement. Since it arrived in the studio, I have been dreaming of this conservation process, what it would be like, and what it's going to require of me. But now that my client has approved the work, I can get started in full. And the first thing that I do is start to prepare a fish glue for the facing of this painting. Because the paint is so delicate and actively flaking off, and because I am going to remove this canvas from its lining, I need to make sure that none of that delicate and important paint is lost. And so the facing will make sure that during handling, during the hot table treatments, and all of the other stuff that I'm going to do, that paint layer is secured and stable. It also protects it a little bit from scratches and handling during that process, even though it's quite dirty and there is an old varnish on it. The first thing I need to do is to orient my paper, and this is a Japanese mulberry paper. The reason I use this paper is because it is incredibly strong. The mulberry fibers can resist quite a lot. Using the edge of my table, I can tear this paper and get a relatively clean edge. And this is a technique that all printmakers know, to create a false deckled edge to simulate a natural paper making process. Once that little strip is cut, I can now start adhering this paper to the face of the painting. The fish gelatin is normally in a jello-like state when it's cool or room temperature, but by heating it up in a double boiler, I can liquefy it, which makes it easy to paint on and allows it to penetrate through the Japanese paper to the paint layer, which is absolutely critical. We're looking for a very good bond here. We want to make sure that there are no air bubbles and that all of the paper is in contact with all of the surface of the paint. Applying the adhesive is relatively straightforward, and I work from the center out to help me eliminate those air bubbles which inevitably will form. And then I just have to let it dry and wait. And that is the hardest part of this entire process, because it's going to take about a day to a day and a half for this to dry completely before I can start handling it. Once I've given it enough time to dry, I can come back and start to remove the canvas from the stretcher. Now, I'm just going to cut this lining canvas right off. This old stretcher is not correctly sized for this piece, and the client has agreed to replace it with a modern stretcher that's going to provide more support. This is not the original stretcher that this painting was attached to when it was created. This is a replacement for the original that was probably added when this last conservation was done, so there's no real historical significance to it. And because I'm going to be removing that old lining canvas, I don't need to pull out all these tacks and save this tacking edge because, well, the original tacking edge is gone. So by cutting it off, I can get to work more efficiently. And by get to work, I mean removing this lining canvas. This lining canvas is primed on the back. You can see that white layer, which means that using moisture or solvents or gels is going to be almost impossible because they're not going to penetrate through that priming. This is one of the fundamental reasons that we don't use primed canvases when we line paintings. We want to make sure that if removal of the lining is necessary, it can be done so either with heat or solvent, and that requires the lining canvas to be porous. Luckily for me in this case, the old adhesive is so brittle, so deteriorated, that I can peel it up. And while it's not as easy as some of the lining removals I've done in the past, I would consider this fairly easy. The canvas tears along the grain, and that's okay. I don't need to remove this lining canvas in one piece, and to some degree, removing it in little strips can be more beneficial for the painting. It allows less stress to be put on the canvas, and I don't have to worry about a really massive piece of canvas getting in the way. In any event, it's just a process of lifting up some of the canvas, using my tools where it's particularly well bonded, and then peeling it off. And then I can see what condition we have with this canvas. I mentioned that the old adhesive was really brittle and deteriorated. So too is the original canvas. And so while I have to remove the excess adhesive, I'm not comfortable exposing it to moisture, even with the gels that I use, because this canvas is so delicate, so frail, and I fear that any moisture exposure would cause it to swell and deteriorate any more. So I'm using a stiff nylon brush, which, yes, I know causes abrasions on the back of the canvas, but it is the least worst of the options I have available to me. Just by going over the canvas with that nylon brush, I'm able to flake off all of the little bits of adhesive that were still stuck. Now, there are some areas where the adhesive is really well bonded, and in those I'm going to go with a very sharp scalpel and just try to slice them off, chip them off, pry them off, just separate them from the original canvas. And I need to do this for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, there is a textural difference, and these little bits of adhesive will telegraph to the front of the painting after all of the treatments I do are done, and that would be bad. But in addition, they'll reactivate when exposed to moisture, and that could just make the process more complicated or messy. Once all of those little bits of adhesive are removed, I can come with my HEPA vacuum and start to remove all of the dust and debris. This is partially to keep my studio clean and also to keep this canvas clean. Imagine if all of this little fine particulate of glue was just left on the canvas. Then, when exposed to moisture, it would effectively reconstitute it, and the glue would then be rebonded to the canvas, thus negating all of the work that I have done thus far. Vacuuming is not terribly exciting, but it does make a difference, and in this case, it's going to be pretty profound. Once that vacuuming is complete, I can now transfer the painting over to the hot table for the first of many treatments. The first thing that I'm doing here is just trying to start relaxing that canvas and that paint layer, because we remember it was so alligatored or lifting up so heavily that we could almost not see the surface of the painting. We could just see the light reflecting off of that texture. So by putting it on the hot table, I can relax the canvas and hopefully, with a little bit of pressure, force some of that paint layer back down onto the canvas. Now, the residual moisture in the studio and that the canvas has absorbed, once heated up, will hopefully activate the sizing within the canvas, which will help bond down some of those lifting pieces of paint. Now, I'm not going to rely on this to stabilize the entire painting, but if I can use it to my advantage, I will, because it makes my life a little bit easier. Now at this point, I'm coming along with a little roller to see if I can use a little bit of pressure to force some of these areas of lifting paint back down. This painting had very little impasto, so I'm not worried about breaking any of the paint layer. And as you can see here, just rolling over it really does have a pretty appreciable effect. It's much smoother now than before I started. The hot table treatment process takes a full day, and then it requires a couple of days under weights for the painting to acclimatize to the studio's relative humidity. If I take it out right away, the painting will just distort and I'll have to do it all over again. But once it has acclimatized, I can take it out from under the weights and I can begin removing this facing. And I'm going to use warm water, paint it on, and then let it sit for a little bit. It takes a couple of minutes for the fish glue to soften up, and then I can start peeling back this layer of paper. Different weights of paper are used for different types of paintings, and sometimes the really lightweight papers, really thin ones, almost disintegrate when they're exposed to water and you try to peel them up. And so for that reason, and because this painting was really smooth without impasto, I was able to use a heavier weight paper. Now, with a lot of impasto, I need the thinner paper because it conforms better to that impasto texture. But sometimes I'll have to double up that paper because I want support, not just a facing to protect it. I've said it before, but one of the benefits of doing this treatment with the washi kozo is that it will lift off some of the surface grime on the painting. So I get the added bonus of getting kind of like a half cleaning along with all of the stabilization and protecting that it does. During the last, or one of the last conservations, this painting received a paper tape applied around the tacking edges and onto the face of the painting. And this has to come off, not only because it is covering up actual paint, but because it's old, deteriorated, full of acid, and has no business being here. Here, I did use a water gel to soften up the adhesive in that tape, and then with my scalpel, I just scraped it up. Ultimately, this edge of the painting will probably be covered by the frame, but I still want to treat it right. It's in my studio and I have the opportunity, so I figure why not? But now we can start focusing on what's really the exciting part, the cleaning. This painting is filthy, has a lot of surface grime and old varnish. Now, while most of that old surface grime was removed with the facing treatment, the old varnish has not been removed, and so I need to remove it. And I'm going to do that with a solvent mixture that I've tested on this painting and a cotton ball rolled on a little wooden stick. And the main reason that we use a wooden stick and a little cotton on it is so that we can see what we're doing. Our hands aren't in the way, and we have more control. Instead of a big cotton ball saturated with solvent spilling out everywhere and eliminating the possibility to work in a very confined area, this little swab allows us to do just that. And you'll notice that I'm cleaning deliberate and discrete areas. I'm not using a grid pattern. I'm not starting in a random place. I'm starting with white because I have tested this to be the most stable color. It's also going to be the most dramatic transition, so I can use it as a litmus test for all of the other colors. I'm staying within the shape of this piece of cloth because I don't want to start to drift into the other areas of paint. Because if they're not as stable as the white, I'll need to change my approach or my cleaning solution. And so by staying in one confined color, I have the highest chance of success. Now, based on the way that the white came up and how clean it looks, I am incredibly excited to see the rest of the painting cleaned. But right off the bat, I'm seeing a lot of damage and a lot of retouching. In fact, I wouldn't even say this is retouching. I'd say it's more glazing or overpainting. Instead of using a very small brush to address the losses, it seems like a thicker brush was used to feather in all of them. It's much faster and much easier, but that's not the way it's supposed to be done. And with respect to the damage, there is a lot. Lots of little chips, little scratches, tiny bits of paint loss, which means there's going to be a lot of retouching for me. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that I was excited about this painting because it really offers the conservator, me, an opportunity to use all of my skills, and that's what makes this job fun. The easy paintings are fun because they're easy, but the challenging ones are fun because they teach you something about yourself, and they let you demonstrate to yourself that you're good at what you do, and that's a really amazing feeling. There's also the great reward of seeing a painting that is in otherwise kind of lousy condition be transformed into something that is beautiful, stunning, takes your breath away. But seeing this now, I'm starting to wonder if I had big eyes, so to speak, because this is going to be a lot of retouching, and retouching takes a ton of time. Whereas this cleaning process will take, maybe 3 or 4 hours from the start to the finish, I can't even begin to estimate how much retouching I'm going to need to do, because every square inch that I reveal seems to get worse than the one prior. That said, I was excited, I'm still excited, just a little bit nervous. With the painting cleaned, I've decided to treat it again on the hot table because I'm not satisfied with the condition of the paint layer. It's still standing up quite a bit and still really textural, and I want it smoother. So, back onto the hot table for treatment number 2. Ultimately, this painting will go on the hot table 3 times before it's all finished, and even though they're just incremental improvements, they matter because I want to get as much as I can out of this piece when I give it back to the client. And this is just how it goes. So back on the hot table, back under weights, and come back next time to see me put it all back together.